Elena Martinez stepped out of the old city bus, her work shoes making soft sounds on the wet pavement. The October evening was getting dark, and she pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. In her hands she carried a worn messenger bag that had seen better days. Inside that bag was something she hadn't touched in years. Sheet music. She looked up at the big brick building in front of her. The sign read Riverside Community Center in faded blue letters. Through the windows she could see warm yellow light spilling out. This was it. After months of thinking about it, she was finally here. Elena had worked 2 shifts at the hospital that day. Her back ached from mopping floors and cleaning rooms, but she couldn't miss this first piano class. She had saved money for 3 months to pay for these lessons. Every dollar came from skipping lunch or walking home instead of taking the bus stop. As she walked toward the entrance, she passed a parking lot full of expensive cars. Shiny BMWs sat next to fancy SUVs. Elena glanced down at her simple clothes, the same dark pants and white shirt she wore to work. She wondered if she belonged here. The lobby was bright and clean. A few people stood around talking, and Elena could tell right away they were different from her. The women wore jewelry that caught the light. The men had watches that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. Their clothes looked like they came from stores Elena had never even walked into. She found a chair in the corner and sat down quietly. From her bag, she pulled out a small notebook where she had written down all the information about the class. Room 201, it said. Piano for adults. Beginner to intermediate. She checked her phone. 5 minutes early, a woman with perfect gray hair and a silk scarf was talking loudly to another student. "Oh, I've been wanting to learn piano for years," she said. "Ever since I retired from the law firm, I finally have time for the finer things in life." Elena looked down at her hands. They were rough from cleaning supplies and hard work. She flexed her fingers, feeling the stiffness that came from years of scrubbing and lifting. These hands used to do something beautiful once. But that was a long time ago. "Are you here for the piano class too?" Elena looked up to see a young man in his 20s. He was wearing an expensive-looking shirt and had the kind of confident smile that came from never worrying about money. "Yes," Elena said softly. "Great, I'm David. I work in tech downtown. Always wanted to learn piano, but never had time until now. What about you?" Elena hesitated. "I'm Elena. I work at the hospital." "Oh, are you a nurse? Doctor?" "No, I clean." Elena's voice got even quieter. David's smile flickered for just a second. "Oh, well, that's honest work." He looked around the room. "I better go find some other people to talk to." "See, you in class." Elena watched him walk away toward a group of well-dressed people. She felt her cheeks get warm with embarrassment. This was a mistake. She didn't belong here with these people. But then she thought about her daughter, Sophia. At 17, Sophia was everything to Elena. She was smart and kind, and she worked hard in school despite everything they had been through. Just last week, Sophia had asked Elena about the old piano in their apartment building's basement. "Mom, do you think Mrs. Rodriguez would let me try to play it sometime?" Sophia had asked. "I've always wondered what it would be like." Elena's heart had squeezed tight. Sophia didn't know the truth about her mother's past. She didn't know that Elena had once sat on stages in front of thousands of people, her fingers dancing across keys like magic. She didn't know about the concerts, the applause, the flowers thrown at her feet. Sophia just knew her mom as someone who worked hard to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Someone who came home tired every night but still helped with homework. Someone who never complained even when things got really tough. That conversation with Sophia was what finally pushed Elena to sign up for these classes. Maybe she could learn to play simple songs. Maybe she could share that small joy with her daughter. Even if she could never share the whole truth. A door opened and a tall man in a dark suit walked out. He had silver hair and wore glasses that made him look very serious. Behind him came a few students, all looking a bit nervous. "That's Professor Hayes," someone whispered. "He used to teach at the music conservatory downtown. They say he's very strict." Professor Hayes looked around the lobby with sharp eyes. When his gaze landed on Elena, she felt like he was seeing right through her. She straightened up in her chair and tried to look confident. "Students for the adult piano class, please follow me to room 201, Professor Hayes announced. His voice was deep and formal. Elena stood up with the others and followed them down a hallway. The room they entered had 4 piano benches arranged in a semicircle. At the front was a beautiful grand piano that gleamed under the lights. "Please, take a seat anywhere," Professor Hayes said. "We'll begin with introductions and a brief assessment." Elena chose a seat in the back, hoping to blend in. She watched as the other students settled in. There was the woman with the silk scarf, who introduced herself as Patricia and talked about her law career. There was David, the tech worker. There was an older man named Robert who had just sold his business and wanted to pursue his childhood dream of playing piano. When it was Elena's turn, she stood up slowly. "I'm Elena Martinez," she said. "I work at St. Mary's Hospital, and I've always loved music." Professor Hayes made a note on his clipboard. "And what is your experience with piano, Mrs. Martinez?" Elena's heart was beating fast. This was the moment she had been dreading and planning for. "Very little," she said. "I played a little when I was young, but not much." It wasn't exactly a lie. She had played when she was young. She just didn't mention that by age 16 she was performing with orchestras across Europe. She didn't mention the standing ovations or the newspaper reviews that called her a gift to the musical world. "I see," Professor Hayes said, making another note. "Well, we'll start with basics for everyone and see where we go from there." The assessment was painful for Elena. She watched as Patricia struggled through a simple scale, hitting wrong notes and losing her timing. She watched as David tried to play a basic melody and made it sound choppy and lifeless. She watched as Robert's fingers stumbled over keys he couldn't quite reach. Then it was her turn. Elena walked to the piano and sat down on the bench. She adjusted it slightly, not too much, just enough to be comfortable. She placed her hands on the keys, and for a moment she felt like she was coming home, but she had to be careful. She had to hide what these hands could really do. She played a simple C major scale, deliberately making small mistakes. She let her timing be a little off. She kept her touch light and unremarkable. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. When she finished, Professor Hayes nodded. "Adequate," he said. "You'll need to work on your finger position and timing, but we can build from there." Elena nodded and returned to her seat. Inside, her heart was breaking a little. Those hands had once brought audiences to tears. They had once made beautiful music that touched people's souls. Now she was pretending. They could barely manage a simple scale. As the class ended, Elena gathered her things quickly. She wanted to get out before anyone tried to talk to her. But as she headed for the door, she heard Patricia talking to another student. "I don't know why some people even bother," Patricia was saying in a voice just loud enough for Elena to hear. "That woman in the back, Elena, I think. She's clearly never going to be able to keep up with the rest of us. Some people just don't have what it takes for music." Elena kept walking, but the words stung. If only Patricia knew the truth. If only any of them knew. But Elena had made her choice long ago. She had chosen to leave that world behind, to become someone ordinary, someone invisible. She had her reasons, good reasons, even if they were painful ones. As she waited for the bus home, Elena looked back at the community center one more time. Through the windows, she could see Professor Hayes, packing up his things. He looked like the kind of teacher who expected perfection, who had no patience for people who didn't meet his standards. This was going to be harder than she thought. But she had to try. For Sophia? For the chance to have music in their lives? Again, even if it was just a small piece of what it used to be, the bus arrived and Elena climbed on. As it pulled away from the curb, she closed her eyes and let herself remember, just for a moment, what it felt like to play the way she really could. Someday maybe she would find the courage to let that part of herself live again, but not today. Today she was just Elena Martinez, hospital cleaner and devoted mother, trying to learn piano like any other ordinary person, if only it were that simple. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's first piano class, and keeping her secret was becoming harder than she had imagined. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening she would finish her hospital shift, rush home to check on Sophia, and then take 2 buses to reach the community center. Each time she had to become someone she wasn't. The other students were starting to form friendships. Patricia, the retired lawyer with the silk scarves, had become the unofficial leader of their little group. She would arrive early and hold court in the lobby, talking about her weekend trips to wine country or her daughter's wedding plans. David, the young tech worker, often joined these conversations, sharing stories about his startup and his expensive hobbies. Elena would sit quietly in the corner, listening but never joining in. When someone occasionally tried to include her, asking about her work or her family, she would give short, polite answers. She learned that the less she said, the less interested they became in talking to her. Elena works at the hospital. She once heard Patricia explaining to a new student who had asked about the quiet woman in the back. Cleaning, I think. She seems nice enough, but you know how it is. We don't really have much in common. The words stung, but Elena told herself it was better this way. The less attention she drew to herself, the safer her secret would be. In class, Professor Hayes was becoming increasingly frustrated with her apparent lack of progress. While the other students slowly improved their basic pieces, Elena had to pretend to struggle with exercises that were far below her actual skill level. It was like trying to forget how to walk or how to breathe. "Mrs. Martinez," Professor Hayes said during their fourth lesson, his voice sharp with annoyance. "You're making the same mistakes you made 3 weeks ago." "Are you practicing at home?" Elena nodded. "Yes, sir, every day." "Then perhaps you need to practice more effectively," he replied, turning to write notes on the board. She could hear some of the other students whispering behind her. The truth was, Elena was practicing every night, but not the simple exercises Professor Hayes assigned. After Sophia went to bed, Elena would put on her old headphones and sit at the small electronic keyboard she had bought years ago but rarely touched. With the volume turned down low, she would let her fingers remember what they used to know. It started slowly. The first night she just played scales, real scales, not the clumsy ones she performed in class. Her fingers felt rusty at first, like they were waking up from a long sleep, but muscle memory was a powerful thing. By the second week, she was playing simple pieces from her childhood lessons. By the third week, her hands were finding their way back to more complex music. One night, she found herself playing a piece she had performed at age 14, a delicate Mozart sonata that required both technical skill and emotional understanding. As her fingers moved across the keys, tears started flowing down her cheeks. She was remembering not just the music, but the girl she used to be. The girl who believed the whole world was waiting to hear what she had to say through music. "Mom, are you okay?" Elena quickly pulled off her headphones and wiped her eyes. Sophia was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, looking concerned. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired from work." Sophia came closer and looked at the keyboard. "That sounded beautiful. I didn't know you could play like that." Elena's heart stopped for a moment. "I was just fooling around. It probably sounded better with the headphones on. Can you teach me sometime? I mean, when you get better at it?" "Maybe," Elena said, quickly shutting off the keyboard. "Now get back to bed. You have school tomorrow." As Sophia headed back to her room, Elena realized how dangerous this double life was becoming. Even at home, she was living a lie. Back in class, the divide between Elena and the other students was growing wider. While they chatted about their weekend plans and shared stories about their practice sessions, Elena remained silent. She began to notice how they looked at her, with a mixture of pity and mild annoyance. "I don't understand why she's even here," she overheard David saying to Patricia one evening before class. "She's not improving at all. It's kind of holding the rest of us back." "Some people just don't have musical talent," Patricia replied. "It's not her fault, really. But Professor Hayes has to spend so much time correcting her basic mistakes that we don't get to work on more interesting pieces." Elena pretended to be reading her music, but every word felt like a small knife. These people had no idea what she was capable of. They saw her plain clothes, her quiet manner, her deliberate mistakes, and they made their judgments. Professor Hayes seemed to share their frustration. During one particularly difficult lesson, he used Elena as an example of what not to do. "Class, please observe Mrs. Martinez's hand position," he said, calling Elena to the front of the room. "Notice how her wrists are positioned incorrectly. This is why she continues to struggle with even basic exercises." Elena stood at the piano, knowing that her hand position was actually perfect, better than anyone else's in the room. But she forced her wrists into an awkward position and played a simple scale badly, just as Professor Hayes expected. "Now, Patricia, please show us the correct way," Professor Hayes continued. Patricia played the same scale, but with obvious technical problems that Elena could have fixed in seconds. Yet Professor Hayes praised her effort and improvement. Elena returned to her seat, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Not because she had played badly, she had meant to, but because she was allowing herself to be humiliated for the sake of maintaining her disguise. The worst part was that she genuinely wanted to help the other students. When she saw David struggling with a particular passage, she knew exactly what he was doing wrong and how to fix it. When Patricia couldn't get the timing right on a simple waltz, Elena's fingers itched to show her the proper rhythm, but she had to sit quietly and watch them make mistakes she could easily correct. One evening, as Elena was packing up her music after class, Robert, the older man who had sold his business, approached her. "Elena," he said quietly, "don't let them get to you." She looked up, surprised. Robert had always seemed friendly, but they had never really talked. "I've been watching," he continued. "I know what it's like to be different from everyone else. Here, I grew up poor, worked with my hands my whole life before I got lucky with that business. These people," he gestured toward Patricia and David, who were planning their weekend at some expensive restaurant, "they've never had to struggle for anything. They don't understand what it means to really want something." Elena felt tears threatening again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Keep trying," Robert said. "Music is for everyone, not just people who can afford fancy teachers and expensive instruments." If only he knew, Elena thought. If only he knew that she didn't need expensive teachers or fancy instruments. She needed something much harder to find the courage to be herself again. That night, Elena sat at her keyboard longer than usual. She played through pieces that had once been as familiar as breathing. Her fingers remembered every note, every phrase, every subtle expression that made the difference between playing notes and making music. She thought about her old life, the concerts, the travel, the applause. But she also remembered why she had walked away from it all. The pressure, the expectations, the way people treated her like she wasn't quite human, just a performing machine. And then the accident that changed everything, the personal tragedy that made her question whether she deserved any of the beauty she had been given. For 16 years, she had lived a different life. She had learned what it meant to work hard, for small rewards, to struggle and save, to put someone else's needs before her own. She had learned to be strong in ways that had nothing to do with music, but sitting there in the darkness, with Sophia sleeping peacefully in the next room, Elena wondered if it was time to stop running from who she used to be. Maybe there was a way to be both people, the dedicated mother and worker she had become, and the musician she had always been inside. The keyboard's small screen showed it was past midnight. Elena put her headphones away and closed the keyboard cover. Tomorrow would bring another day of cleaning hospital rooms, another evening of pretending to be less than she was, but for the first time in years she found herself looking forward to finding out what came next. The music was waking up inside her, and she wasn't sure she could keep it quiet much longer, even if it meant everything would change. The 8th week of piano class brought news that made Elena's stomach drop. Professor Hayes stood at the front of the room with his usual stern expression, but there was something different in his eyes, a kind of excitement that made Elena nervous. "Students," he announced, adjusting his glasses, "I have important news about our semester and requirements." Elena felt her hands get cold. She had been dreading this moment since the classes began. She knew that most piano courses ended with some kind of performance, but she had hoped maybe this one would be different. "In 2 weeks we will hold our end-of-semester recital," Professor Hayes continued. "Each of you will perform a piece that demonstrates what you've learned during our time together." The other students looked excited. Patricia immediately started whispering to David about what piece she might choose. Robert smiled and nodded to himself as if he had been preparing for this moment, but Elena felt like the room was spinning. "The recital will be held here in the main auditorium," Professor Hayes went on. "Family and friends are welcome to attend. This is your chance to show everyone how much you've improved." Elena's mind raced. A public performance, people watching. What if someone recognized her? What if her carefully built new life came crashing down? But worse than that, what if she had to perform badly on purpose in front of Sophia? She had planned to invite Sophia to watch her play. Her daughter had been asking about the piano lessons, showing more interest in music lately. Elena had imagined playing a simple, sweet piece that would make Sophia proud of her mom's new hobby, but now the whole thing felt like a trap. "Now," Professor Hayes said, "let's discuss piece selection. Patricia, you've been working well with Mozart. Perhaps one of his simpler sonatas?" Patricia beamed. "Oh, that sounds wonderful. I've been practicing that piece we worked on last week." "Excellent, David. I think a Chopin waltz would suit you well. Nothing too complex, but something that shows you're developing technique." David nodded eagerly. "I'd love to try Chopin." Professor Hayes went around the room, assigning pieces to each student based on their abilities. Elena watched with growing dread as he saved her for last. When he finally turned to her, his expression was different. There was something cold in his eyes. "Mrs. Martinez," he said slowly, "your progress has been disappointing." The room went quiet. Elena could feel the other students looking at her, some with pity, others with the kind of uncomfortable embarrassment people feel when watching someone else fail. "In 8 weeks you have shown minimal improvement," Professor Hayes continued. "Your technique remains poor, your timing inconsistent, and your musical understanding appears limited." Elena's face burned with shame. Not because the criticism hurt her feelings, she knew it wasn't true, but because she had worked so hard to create this impression, and now it was being used against her in front of everyone. "Sir," she said quietly, "I've been practicing. No, I'm not as fast as the others, but maybe I could play something simple. A children's song, perhaps?" Professor Hayes's expression grew even colder. "Mrs. Martinez, I don't think you understand the purpose of this recital. This is not a participation trophy situation. This is about demonstrating real musical growth." Elena felt her cheeks getting hotter. "I understand, but let me be clear," Professor Hayes interrupted. "Your lack of progress reflects poorly not just on you, but on this entire program. When people attend our recital, they expect to hear students who have learned something meaningful." The other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even Patricia, who had never been particularly kind to Elena, looked like she felt bad. For her dot, Professor Hayes walked over to his desk and picked up a piece of sheet music. Elena's heart nearly stopped when she saw what it was. The black notes on the page were as familiar to her as her own name. "You will perform Chopin's Etude in C minor, Opus 10, number 12, Professor Hayes announced. The Revolutionary Etude? The room went completely silent. Even the students who didn't know much about classical music had heard of this piece. It was famous for being incredibly difficult, something that only advanced pianists attempted. "Professor," David said carefully, "isn't that ... I mean, that's a really hard piece." "Very hard," Professor Hayes agreed, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "Perhaps impossible for someone at Mrs. Martinez's current level." Elena stared at the sheet music in his hands. This piece had a special place in her heart and her history. She had first learned it at age 13, performed it at Carnegie Hall at 14, and it had been the piece that launched her professional career. The Revolutionary Etude was one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire, requiring years of training and exceptional skill. Sir, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I can. Exactly my point, Professor Hayes cut her off. You can't. But perhaps facing something truly challenging will force you to take your musical education seriously for once. He walked over and placed the sheet music on Elena's music stand. You have 2 weeks to prepare. If you cannot perform this piece adequately, then perhaps you should consider whether piano lessons are really for you. Elena looked down at the music, her vision blurring with tears of frustration and anger. This man had no idea what he was doing to her. He thought he was teaching her a lesson about effort and dedication. Instead, he was forcing her to choose between humiliating herself publicly or revealing a secret that could destroy the life she had built. That's not fair, Robert spoke up from across the room. Professor, with respect, that piece is way beyond what any of us could handle, let alone Elena. Life isn't fair, Mr. Robert, Professor Hayes replied coldly. Music demands excellence. If Mrs. Martinez wants to be here, she needs to prove she belongs. The class ended in uncomfortable silence. As the other students packed up their things, Elena sat frozen at her piano bench, staring at the sheet music. The notes seemed to dance on the page, mocking her with their familiarity. Patricia approached her cautiously. Elena, you don't have to do this. Maybe you could talk to the director of the program. This seems unreasonable. Elena looked up, surprised by the kindness in Patricia's voice. For the first time since classes began, Patricia was looking at her like she was a real person, not just someone to pity or ignore. I'll figure something out, Elena said quietly. David came over too, looking genuinely concerned. Seriously, Elena, this is crazy. That piece is like concert-level stuff. I've been playing for years and I wouldn't even attempt it. If only you knew, Elena thought. If only any of you knew. Thank you, she said to both of them. I appreciate your concern. As Elena packed up her things, her hands were shaking. The sheet music felt heavy in her bag, weighted with memories and impossible choices. She had 2 weeks to decide what to do, and every option seemed terrible. She could refuse to perform and drop out of the class. But that would mean giving up the small connection to music she had found. And disappointing Sophia, who was looking forward to hearing her play. She could attempt the piece and fail spectacularly, playing it so badly that no one would ever suspect her real abilities. But the thought of butchering a piece she loved in front of her daughter made her feel sick, or she could play it the way it deserved to be played with all the skill and passion she possessed. But that would mean the end of her carefully constructed ordinary life on the bus ride home. Elena closed her eyes and let herself remember the first time she had performed the revolutionary etude. She was 14 years old, wearing a white dress her grandmother had sewn by hand. The audience at Carnegie Hall had given her a standing ovation that lasted for 5 minutes. The newspaper review the next day called her performance transcendent and a glimpse of musical genius. That girl felt like a different person now. Someone from a story Elena had read long ago, not someone she had actually been. When she got home, Sophia was at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up when Elena walked in, immediately noticing her mother's troubled expression. How was piano class, Mom? Elena forced a smile. Fine, sweetheart. Just fine? Are you going to play something for me soon? I'd love to hear what you've been learning. Elena's heart broke a little more. Maybe, she said. We'll see. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Elena sat at her small keyboard with the revolutionary etude spread out in front of her. She hadn't looked at this piece in over 20 years, but every note was exactly where she remembered it. She put on her headphones and placed her hands on the keys. As she began to play, the years melted away. Her fingers found their way through the complex passages like they were following a map written in her soul. The music poured out of her, full of all the emotion and pain she had been holding back for so long. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face. She realized that Professor Hayes had unknowingly given her both a gift and a curse. He had forced her to confront the music that had once defined her, the piece that represented everything she had walked away from. Elena looked toward Sophia's room, then back at the keyboard. In 2 weeks, she would have to make a choice that would change everything. She just wasn't sure she was ready for whatever came next, but ready or not, the revolutionary etude was waiting for her, just like it had been waiting all these years. The first week after Professor Hayes's announcement passed like a blur. Elena went through her daily routine, cleaning hospital rooms, taking care of Sophia, attending piano classes, but her mind was constantly spinning. Every night she sat at her small keyboard staring at the revolutionary etude, trying to figure out what to do. She had tried practicing the piece badly, playing it with deliberate mistakes and poor technique. But it felt like torture. Every wrong note, every clumsy phrase made her feel like she was betraying something sacred inside herself. The music wanted to flow correctly, and fighting against that natural instinct was exhausting. During the second piano class that week, Elena noticed that the other students were treating her differently. Word had spread about Professor Hayes's impossible assignment, and instead of their usual indifference, she saw genuine concern in their faces. "Elena," Patricia whispered as they were setting up their music, "have you thought about talking to someone? Maybe the community center director? What Professor Hayes is doing isn't right." Elena was touched by Patricia's unexpected kindness, but she just shook her head. "I'll manage somehow." "But that piece is insane," David added, keeping his voice low so Professor Hayes wouldn't hear. "I looked it up online. It's something professional pianists play, concert pianists." Elena's heart skipped. "You looked it up?" "Yeah, I found this video of some famous pianist playing it at a big concert hall. It was incredible, but also terrifying. The speed, the complexity." "Elena, nobody expects you to actually learn this in 2 weeks." Elena nodded, but inside she was panicking. If David was watching videos of the revolutionary etude online, how long before he or someone else started comparing performances? How long before someone noticed if she played it too well? Professor Hayes spent most of that class working with the other students on their recital pieces. Elena sat at her piano, pretending to struggle with the opening measures of the Chopin etude. But even as she played the notes slowly and awkwardly, she could feel Professor Hayes watching her with suspicious eyes. "Mrs. Martinez," he said during a break, "how is your preparation coming along?" "It's challenging," Elena replied, which was the truth, just not in the way he thought. "Good, challenge builds character." He paused, studying her face. "You know, there's something about your hand position that bothers me. You hold your fingers like someone who has played before, but your actual playing suggests otherwise." Elena's blood went cold. "I told you I played a little when I was young." Professor Hayes didn't look convinced. "Well, keep working. I'm curious to see what you produce." After class, Elena hurried to catch her bus, but Robert caught up with her in the parking lot. "Elena, wait," he called out. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She stopped, worried that he was going to offer more sympathy she couldn't handle. "I've been thinking about what's happening here," Robert said quietly. "And I want you to know that some of us are planning to talk to a center director. What Professor Hayes is doing is bullying, plain and simple." "Please don't," Elena said quickly. "I don't want to make trouble." "You're not making trouble. He is." Robert looked at her carefully. "Elena, can I ask you something? And I want you to know, whatever you tell me stays between us." Elena nodded nervously. "That day when you played your assessment and these past few weeks, sometimes when you're playing, your hands move like you know what you're doing, really know, but then the music that comes out doesn't match." He paused. "Is there something you're not telling us?" Elena felt like her heart was going to beat out of her chest. Robert was too observant, too kind, too smart. She couldn't lie to him directly, but she couldn't tell him the truth either. "Music is complicated," she said finally. "Sometimes our hands remember things our minds have forgotten." Robert studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand. We all have things in our past that are complicated." As Elena rode the bus home, she realized that her secret was starting to crack around the edges. Robert suspected something. Professor Hayes was getting suspicious. And at home, Sophia was asking more and more questions about the piano lessons. That evening, Sophia was waiting for her in the kitchen with her homework spread out on the table. But Elena could tell her daughter had something else on her mind. "Mom," Sophia said carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said before, about maybe teaching me some piano sometime." Elena's stomach clenched. "Sophia, I'm still learning myself. I'm not ready to teach anyone yet, but maybe we could learn together? I found some videos online about beginner piano, and they make it look really fun." Sophia's eyes were bright with excitement. "We could practice together in the evenings." Elena sat down heavily at the table. "Sweetheart, piano lessons cost money. Money we don't really have extra of right now?" "I know, but you're already taking lessons. And you have that keyboard. I wouldn't need my own teacher or anything fancy. I just thought ... double quote, Sophia's voice got quieter. "I thought it might be something we could share." Elena felt tears threatening. Sophia so rarely asked for anything. She worked hard in school, helped around the apartment, never complained about their tight budget or the fact that Elena was always tired from work. The one thing her daughter wanted was something Elena could easily give her, but only if she was willing to risk everything. "Let me think about it," Elena said. "After my recital is over, maybe we can talk about it more." "You're having a recital?" Sophia's face lit up. "Mom, that's amazing. Can I come watch?" Elena's heart sank. "It's not a big deal. Just a small thing. For the families of students. But I'm your family. Please, Mom. I really want to hear you play." Elena looked at her daughter's hopeful face and realized she couldn't say no. "Okay, yes, you can come." Sophia jumped up and hugged her. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. I know you've been working really hard on this." That night, after Sophia went to bed, Elena made a decision. She would try to find a middle ground. She would learn the revolutionary etude well enough to get through it without embarrassing herself completely, but she would hold back enough to avoid suspicion. It was risky, but maybe she could thread the needle between failure and exposure. She put on her headphones and began to work through the piece section by section. The muscle memory was strong, but she hadn't played anything this complex in years. Her fingers were stiff from cleaning work, and some of the fastest passages felt awkward at first. But as she practiced night after night, something magical started happening. The music began to wake up inside her like a flower that had been dormant through a long winter. Each evening she could play a little more, remember a little more, feel a little more of who she used to be. By the end of the first week, she could play the entire piece, though not at full speed and not with all the expression she knew it deserved. By the middle of the second week, her fingers were remembering the lightning-fast runs and complex harmonies that made the piece so famous, but the more she played it correctly, the harder it became to imagine playing it badly on purpose. The revolutionary etude was a piece about struggle, about fighting against impossible odds, about the triumph of the human spirit. Every time she played it, Elena felt like she was telling her own story. During the final piano class before the recital, the tension in the room was thick. The other students were nervous about their own performances, but they kept glancing at Elena with worried faces. Professor Hayes seemed to be enjoying the drama he had created. "Mrs. Martinez," he said as the class was ending, "I hope you're prepared for tomorrow evening. The revolutionary etude is not a piece that forgives mistakes." "I understand," Elena replied. "Do you?" "Because I've been thinking about our conversation, about your hand position and technique. There's something that doesn't add up." Professor Hayes stepped closer. "You play like someone who has had training, but you perform like someone who hasn't. It's quite puzzling." Elena felt sweat on her palms. "Maybe I just have good instincts." "Perhaps. Or perhaps there's something you haven't told us about your musical background." Before Elena could respond, David interrupted. "Professor Hayes, with respect, Elena's been working really hard. Maybe instead of questioning her, we could focus on helping her get ready for tomorrow?" Professor Hayes looked annoyed at being challenged, but he backed off. "Of course. I'm simply curious to see what Mrs. Martinez has prepared for us." As Elena packed up her music, her hands were shaking. Tomorrow night, everything would change. She would either have to humiliate herself in front of Sophia and the other students, or she would have to reveal abilities that would raise questions she couldn't answer. Mrs. Chun, The accompanist who helped with some of the classes approached Elena as she was leaving. "Elena," she said quietly, "I don't know what your story is, and I'm not asking. But I want you to know that music has a way of revealing truth. Tomorrow night, whatever you choose to do, make sure it's something you can live with." Elena nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in Mrs. Chun's words. Tomorrow night wasn't just about a piano recital. It was about choosing who she wanted to be going forward. On the bus ride home, Elena closed her eyes and made her final decision. She thought about Sophia's excited face when she talked about coming to the recital. She thought about the revolutionary etude and what it meant to her. She thought about the woman she had become. The day of the recital arrived with gray clouds and a light rain that matched Elena's nervous mood. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing between excitement and terror. Today, after 26 years of hiding, she would either reclaim who she really was or lose everything she had built. Elena went to work at the hospital as usual, but her supervisor noticed she seemed distracted. "You okay today, Elena?" asked Janet, the head of housekeeping. "You've been cleaning that same window for 5 minutes." Elena looked down at her cleaning cloth, realizing she had been moving it in circles without really seeing what she was doing. "Sorry, Janet, I have something important tonight. I guess I'm a little nervous. Well, whatever it is, I hope it goes well. You've been working here for years, and I've never seen you this wound up about anything." Elena smiled. If only Janet knew that her quiet, reliable cleaning lady was about to perform one of the most challenging pieces in classical music. The afternoon dragged by slowly. Elena found herself looking at her hands while she worked. These hands that had once been famous, that had been photographed for magazine covers and newspaper articles. Tonight they would tell the truth again. When she got home, Sophia was already getting ready for the recital. She had put on her best dress, a simple blue one that Elena had bought her for school pictures, and was brushing her hair carefully. "Mom, I'm so excited," Sophia said, practically bouncing with energy. "I've never been to a real piano recital before." "What are you going to play?" Elena's stomach twisted. "A piece by Chopin. It's challenging. I can't wait to hear it. I've been telling my friends at school that my mom is learning piano. They think it's really cool." Elena felt a rush of love for her daughter, mixed with fear about what Sophia might think when she learned the truth about her mother's past. Would Sophia be proud, or would she feel betrayed by all the years of secrets? "Sophia," Elena said carefully, "whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Sophia looked at her strangely. "Mom, you're acting weird. It's just a piano recital, not brain surgery." If only it were that simple, Elena thought. They arrived at the community center an hour before the recital was scheduled to begin. The main auditorium looked different than Elena remembered, bigger, more formal. About 50 chairs were set up for the audience, and a beautiful grand piano sat on the small stage. Under bright lights, other students were already there with their families. Patricia had brought her husband and adult daughter. David's parents had driven in from the suburbs. Robert was there with his wife and what looked like his grandchildren. Everyone seemed nervous but excited. Elena and Sophia found seats in the middle section. Sophia kept looking around with wide eyes, taking in everything about her first classical music event. "The piano is so big," Sophia whispered, "and shiny. Do you get to play on that one?" "Yes," Elena said, her mouth feeling dry. Professor Hayes appeared on stage to welcome everyone and explain the program. "Tonight, you'll hear from our dedicated adult students who have worked hard all semester to master new pieces. We'll begin with our more advanced students and work our way through the program." Elena's heart sank. That meant she would be performing last, after everyone else had played their simpler pieces successfully. The contrast would be even more dramatic. Patricia performed first, playing a Mozart sonata with careful precision. She made a few small mistakes, but overall it was a respectable performance for someone who had been learning for just a few months. The audience clapped warmly. David followed with his Chopin waltz. He had improved significantly since the beginning of the semester, and his performance had a light, pleasant quality that made people smile. More enthusiastic applause. Robert played a batch invention with steady, thoughtful phrasing. It was clear he had practiced diligently, and his genuine love for the music came through in every note. The audience seemed charmed by his obvious joy. In playing Dot as each student performed, Elena felt the weight of expectation growing heavier. These were all lovely performances by people who had worked hard and improved steadily. Soon she would either have to embarrass herself completely or reveal that she was operating on an entirely different level. "Mrs. Martinez will close our program this evening," Professor Hayes announced, with Chopin's Revolutionary Etude. Elena heard a few gasps from the audience. Some of the family members clearly recognized the name of the piece and understood how difficult it was. Sophia leaned over and whispered, "Mom, people seem surprised by your piece. Is it really hard?" "Very hard," Elena whispered back Doc. As Elena walked toward the stage, her legs felt unsteady. She could see Professor Hayes watching her with cold, curious eyes, probably expecting her to humiliate herself. She could see the other students looking worried for her. She could see Sophia in the audience, her face full of love and support. Elena sat down at the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. The moment her fingers touched the keys, something shifted inside her. This was a real piano, a beautiful instrument that responded to every subtle touch. After months of practicing on her small electronic keyboard, sitting at this grand piano felt like coming home. She took a deep breath and placed her hands in position. In the audience, she could see people leaning forward, some looking uncomfortable, because they expected to witness a disaster. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment and let herself remember who she really was. She was Elena Vasquez, who had played this piece at Carnegie Hall when she was 14 years old. She was the girl who had made audiences weep with the beauty of her music. She was the woman who had given up fame and recognition to raise her daughter and build a different kind of life. Tonight, she would be both people at once. Elena began to play. The opening chords of the Revolutionary Etude burst from the piano with power and precision that made several audience members sit up straight in surprise. This wasn't the hesitant, struggling student they had expected to hear. This was someone who understood this music in her bones. As Elena moved into the piece's famous rapid passages, her fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking speed and accuracy. Every note was crystal clear, every phrase shaped with the kind of musical intelligence that took decades to develop. The technical demands of the piece, which would challenge even advanced students, seemed effortless under her hands. But it wasn't just the technical skill that was remarkable. Elena was telling a story with this music, pouring 26 years of hidden emotion into every phrase. The piece became a journey through struggle and triumph, loss and rediscovery, pain and ultimate joy. Professor Hayes's mouth had fallen open. He stood frozen at the side of the stage, staring at Elena with complete shock. This was not just competent playing. This was artistry at the highest level. In the audience, the other students were transfixed. Patricia gripped her husband's arm, her eyes wide with amazement. David was leaning forward. So far, he was almost falling off his chair. Robert had tears in his eyes, understanding somehow that he was witnessing something extraordinary. And Sophia was watching her mother with a mixture of awe and confusion. This couldn't be the woman who had struggled with simple scales just a few months ago. This was someone else entirely, someone who belonged on concert stages, not in hospital corridors. As Elena approached the piece's thunderous climax, she felt 26 years of hiding fall away. She was no longer pretending to be less than she was. She was giving everything she had to this music, holding nothing back. The final chords rang out in the auditorium, and for a moment there was complete silence. Elena sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, breathing hard from the emotional intensity of the performance. Then the applause began. But this wasn't the polite clapping that had followed the other performances. This was the kind of ovation that happens when an audience knows they have witnessed something truly special. People leaped to their feet, applauding and cheering. Sophia was crying, though Elena could see she didn't fully understand why. Elena stood slowly and walked to the front of the stage. Professor Hayes approached her, his face pale with shock. "Who are you?" he whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. Elena looked out at the audience, at all these people who had underestimated her, who had seen only a quiet cleaning lady and missed the artist underneath. She looked at Sophia, who deserved to know the truth about her mother. "I'm Elena Martinez," she said into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Sophia's mother. I work at St. Mary's Hospital cleaning rooms to pay our bills." She paused, seeing the confusion on many faces. "And 26 years ago, I was Elena Vasquez. I performed with orchestras across Europe before I chose a different life." The auditorium buzzed with whispers and gasps. People were pulling out their phones, probably looking up her old name to see if they could find information about her past career. "I hid who I was because I thought it was safer that way," Elena continued. "I thought it was better to be ordinary, to blend in, to not draw attention. But tonight, playing this music again, I remembered something important." She looked directly at Sophia. "I remembered that our gifts aren't meant to be hidden, they're meant to be shared."